Hey guys, welcome to lesson 15 of how to make iPhone apps with no programming experience. In this lesson, we are going to add code to keep score for each round for the player and the enemy. Now before we do that though, I created some graphics to improve the look and feel of our app. So I've got a logo here that I'm going to put near the top. I've got a deal button, which I'm going to replace the play round button with, or rather I'm going to add the image to the button. And I created a new background, so it's got this sort of spotlight feel to it rather than just solid green. So let's go ahead and add those graphics to our asset library first. Okay, so first we're going to change the background. Now I named my new graphic assets new background, and instead of adding a new image set called new background, I'm just going to highlight these three and I'm going to drag it into the spot. I'm going to drag it into the image set for the original background. And then just like that, I can keep the background asset name, but the actual assets are using my new image. I've got the logo here, so I'm just going to drag that into there. And I've also got the deal button graphic here. So I'm going to drag that there as well. Okay, now let's go into our storyboard. Now to change our button, so you can see that the background image has taken effect already. So in order to add an image to our button, we're going to come here, click the button, go into the inspector pane on the right hand side. And if you scroll down, see there's image and there's background. If you specify background and you pick deal button, you see the image is going to appear there, but the text is going to appear on top of it. So you can either do that and then erase the text, or let me just erase the background, or you can set it as the image. For example, if you wanted, what was it, deal button. For example, if you wanted the image beside some text. So I'm just going to do that, but I'm going to erase the text so that we have a button with just an image right there. But also in viewController.swift, in the viewDidLoad method, we were practicing setting properties and calling methods in here. So this one actually adds the title play. So I need to get rid of this line, or else it's going to add the text play beside my button image. So I don't want a title for my button. Okay, next we need to add an image at the top of our view. So we search for UI image view here. I'm just going to drag it and drop it right there. And now we got to add some constraints to it. It's going to get a little bit tricky. It took me a little bit to figure out a good way to make it scale in both orientations. I'll show you in a second. For example, I want it centered, right? So I'm going to click this down here. I'm going to put horizontal center in container. I'm going to add that constraint. And then I'm also going to add the constraint that it should be, let's say, 10 pixels off the top margin. So I'm going to add that constraint. And then up here, I'm going to set the image to the logo. Okay, I'm going to run the app now so you can see what it looks like. Okay, so you can see that the image looks pretty small and our button image is there. If I rotate it, you can see that the logo fits as well. However, I kind of want the logo to be larger when it's in portrait view. And the original size of the image is actually not this small. It's actually larger than this. It's actually this size right here. So I'm going to add some constraints. I'm actually also going to set a background for this UI image view so we can see how it stretches. So I'm going to add some constraints to the margins of this UI image view. So I'm going to say that I'm just going to add margins all the way around, because I've already got the top margin I added, so I'm going to add the left, right, and bottom constraints. And by doing that, it's going to make this UI image view have a constraint right here, and right here between this card container view and this logo. So now let's see how it looks. Okay, so now you can see it's stretched a bit in this view. And when I change it, you can see it's stretched flat like that. The reason is because it's maintaining that this UI image view should be 64 from the left, 64 from the right, and 59 between these two elements, between this card view container and the image view. So, and it's maintaining 10. So that's why it's stretched like this in this view. And that's why it's also stretched like that from this view, because it's 64 from here, 64 from here, 59 from here, and 10 from the top. Well, there's one thing we can change here off the bat, is that for the UI image view, you can make the image not stretch. So there's a mode. If you click your UI image view, go to the inspector, right now it's set to scale to fill. So it's just going to scale up the image and disregard the aspect ratio. And that's how we get the stretched image. If we don't want it to stretch, we can do aspect to fit. And this is going to maintain the aspect ratio of the image, and it's going to fit it inside the bounds of the UI image view. Aspect fill is kind of the same. It's going to maintain the aspect ratio of the image, but it's going to ignore the bounds of the UI image view. This is the one we want. You can play around with it and to see what the difference is visually if you want. But now in this way, it looks pretty decent in portrait, and when we go to the landscape view, it maintains the aspect ratio, so it's not stretched. But I find that because this is 59, it's maintaining that this margin here is 59, it's squishing the height. But here, 59 is actually fine. So what I want to do instead is maybe specify that this margin shouldn't be 59, but maybe rather should be something like maybe 20. So let's try that. I'm going to look for this constraint here. When I click it, on the right hand side here, on the right hand pane, you can see that card view container top, which is this guy, and the logo bottom, which is this guy, the relationship is equal to 59. So I'm going to change that 59 to 20. Okay, so let's update the frames. Now let's run it again. So that looks a lot better. So keep in mind that you can also, if we go back to that constraint, if I can find it, there it is. Instead of equal, you can also do less than or equal to or greater than or equal instead of just equal. So like I said, playing around with the auto layout and getting your constraints right with the elements does take a little bit of time. So try not to get too frustrated. Now we're going to add some labels for the score. So I'm going to search here for the label, and I'm going to drag it here, and I'm going to add it inside the play button container actually in this lower corner. So first of all, let's add some constraints to this guy. I want to anchor it to the lower left. So I'm going to go click this guy here, anchor, and I'm going to put let's say 10. Oops. I don't want, let's try that again. Add a constraint to the left margin and the right one, and I want to set both of them to 10. Okay, and I want to change the text to white, and I want to change the font size to 100, and I want to center align it. So let's put a number here instead of the label. Let's just put 1. Now let's update the frames on this guy. Okay, and let's see if it sticks in that corner when we rotate it left and right. And actually we can remove the red background on that image view. Okay, so that stays put, the score down there. Next, I'm going to add a label to indicate that this is the player's score. And I'm going to select this label. I'm going to hold down Command and also select my score label. I'm going to horizontally center both of them in relationship to each other, so they'll both be centered down this line right here, like that. You can see that orange line. And I also want to basically make this label stay on top of this score label. So I can add, whoops, I don't want to select both of them. I want to select just this label here. And I want to specify that the margin below here should be 10. And one trick, because it says spacing to nearest neighbor, right? And the nearest neighbor should be this score label, but sometimes when your element is overlapping the other element, it doesn't detect that there is a neighbor here. So in order to verify, you can click this little drop down arrow. So you can see here that the element I'm specifying my label to be 10 pixels above is actually the play button container, which is not what I want, because the play button container is this guy right here, this whole container. If I specified that my label should be 10 pixels from that, it's going to be at the bottom here. So instead, the problem is because you see the label, the two labels are kind of overlapping, and so when I'm trying to add a constraint to my my player label here, it's not detecting this guy as the neighbor. So I just want to move this up a little bit so it's not touching this label, and I can try it again. So now when I add, oops, let's select that, click this. I want to add a 10 pixel constraint to the bottom. Let's click this arrow, and now you can see that this label, the player score label, is selected, which is actually the one I wanted to do, but it changed the value. Let me put 10. Add that constraint. Now we can update the frame. So now it'll actually sit on top right here. Now let's set the properties for this guy. I'm going to write U as the text. I'm going to change the color to white. I'm going to center align the text. I'm going to change the font size to 30. Okay, so I'm going to run it. Let's see how that looks. Okay, maybe 30 is too big of a font size. So let's try 20. I'm going to change this background to transparent again. Okay, now I'm going to do the same for the other side. Into the play button container, add the constraints there and there, 10 and 10. Update frames. And let's change this to a 1. Change the color to white. Font size is 100. And center align the text. Okay, there we go. Now I want to add another label here for the enemy. And for this one, I want to center align both these guys. So I selected both of them and added a constraint for horizontal centers. And now I'm going to specify that this guy should be 10 above the nearest neighbor, which is that one, 10. Update the frame. And now I'm going to change that to enemy. Change the color to white. Change the font size to 20. Center align. Okay, now let's run it. Take a look at how it looks. Okay, so now we've got our score labels. And I want to now expose this and this as IB outlets to the view controller. Actually, let me put 0. The default value should be 0. Okay, so I'm going to go into Assistant Editor. Let me just make some space here. Okay, so let's do it right here. Hold down Control, click drag. This is going to be the player score. I'm going to do it again here. This is going to be the enemy score. And now let's go into single view and go into viewcontroller.swift. Okay, so I want to show you guys something about variable scoping here. And that is basically any variables that you declare and use within a method doesn't retain its value. Okay, so what do I mean by that? I think it's better if I demonstrate. So let me open up some lines here and let me say var player score equals 0. Let me just change that. Player score total, enemy score total equals 0. Okay, so now let's implement this code in here. If the first random number is greater than the second random number, then player score total plus equals 1. So this increments the player score total by 1. Right? And these are two variables that we created and declared inside this method to keep track of the score. Let's update the label text. So self dot player score dot text equals player score total, and we can actually create a new string and pass in that number. Now, if the first random number is the same as the second random number, then we don't increase the score. Otherwise, it's actually the enemy score total plus equals 1. So we increment the enemy's score if the second number is larger. And self.enemyscore.text, that's the text property of the label that we're changing. String enemy score total. Okay, let's run that. Okay, so that's a tie. so no one gets a score. So the player gets a queen and the enemy gets a 7, so we incremented the score. That means our if statement is working properly. Now watch this. I'm going to deal again, and the enemy gets a king. It's bigger, so this is correct. I'm going to deal again. Okay, so the player gets a king, which is larger than the enemy, but why didn't the score increase? I'm going to keep doing it, but the score never increases. Now why is that? It's because we declared these variables in here, right? But each time this method executes, these variables are reset. So instead of declaring these variables in here, we actually need to move these guys out, because in here, they're in the scope of this method, right? So these values only pertain to what's going on in this method. But if we move it outside to the top here, by moving the variables up here, now the scope of these variables is for the entire class. So they'll maintain their values even throughout the lifetime of any method executions or method calls. Simply by doing that, the scores can now be tracked beyond a single method call. So that's very important to remember. For example, in this method, we declared first card string as a variable, and then we assigned some string into that variable. I wouldn't be able to call or use this or reference this variable name from another method because it's not in the same scope. Because this variable is declared in here inside this method, I can only use it inside this method. So let's go back to our app. So I hope you were able to follow along and build this war card game on your own computer. And if not, don't worry. I'm going to post the source code below the video and you can download it and see what's different. Also, in the next lesson, we're going to do a recap of what we've learned so far from lessons 1 to 15. And we've definitely learned a lot, especially if you've never programmed before. I bet you're amazed at how far you've come and how much you've learned. In the future, we can even add animations to the cards and add some sound effects to really bring this game to life. Okay, so I'll see you in the next lesson.